I flew on Canadian North's 737-300 Combi. Boeing 737s are a plane that you see a lot of in Canada, and the older variants are especially common in the Canadian territories. I've talked plenty about the original series 737s, namely the 737-200s with their smaller engines and how they're able to use gravel runways. Now, the classic series of 737s, that is the 300, 400, and 500, while only being able to use paved runways, are also very common here. Canadian North Airlines operates 8 737 Classics as of posting this, although they are steadily adding more and more 737NGs as replacements. 2 of their 737-300s as well as 2 400s are combis and can carry a roughly 50-50 split of cargo and passengers on their main deck. One route that you often see these planes on is Canadian North's flagship route between Ottawa and Iqaluit, the capital of NUNAVUT. Anyone who's watched these videos for any length of time knows my fascination with Canada's north, and Iqaluit is the last of the 3 territorial capitals that I had yet to visit. This also happened to tie into a much larger and even more significant trip with some good friends of mine, which won't be that hard to guess if you think of international destinations out of Iqaluit. Canadian North usually has quite a comprehensive in-flight service, and niche 737 variants are a cornerstone of this channel, so I knew this would be a flight worth filming. After getting ourselves to Ottawa, a very roundabout way with far too much time to spare, we headed up to YOW's departures level. Ottawa's pre-security area is quite nice, with high ceilings and lots of space. Canadian North's check-in counters were off to the side next to Air France. They do have an online check-in, which works well, but we still had to wait in line to drop off our bags. Customer service agents arrived about 2.5 hours before departure, tagged our bags, and gave us all printed boarding passes. From there, it was off to Gate 29, right on the end of the domestic concourse, and also one of a few ground loading gates in this part of the airport. Pretty soon, our ride to NUNAVUT was landing on runway 07, this 26-year-old Boeing 737-300, registered as Charlie Foxtrot Golf Charlie November. This one was first delivered to Czech airline Fisher Air in March 1999. It moved over to its Polish subsidiary, Fisher Air Polska, in April 2005, and then joined short-lived Polish low-cost carrier Central Wings in May 2006. It then made its way to Brazil in 2009, flying for low-cost carrier Webjet, not to be confused with the teal Canadian Airline, and eventually joined Canadian North in September 2013. It was converted into a 737-300 QC for quick change in April 2017, and has continued to fly for Canadian North since. The quick change conversion essentially allows an operator to fly these planes one of 3 ways. All cargo with room for 8 pallets, a combi layout with 3 pallets and 80 passengers, or a full passenger configuration seating up to 136. From the sounds of it though, it seems Canadian North very rarely operates these in the full freighter configuration, if at all. Although less flexible than the 737-200 that could have multiple different combinations of pallets and people, it is still useful for the type of flying that Canadian North does. You can even see the larger overhead bins attached to the inside of the cargo door. Now, flying on another very niche 737 subtype is still cool, but when we booked this, it was supposed to be on board one of Canadian North's 737-400 combis. They have 2 of those planes, as well as 1 full passenger one, which are arguably rarer than any version of the 300. Even so, it is nice to get an unexpected flight in on a plane still wearing the old polar bear livery. Boarding eventually began about half an hour before departure. It was not terribly organized though, with announcements for a bunch of different flights being played at the same time, and Canadian North's just being completely drowned out. Eventually, we figured out that they were boarding by row numbers. Mine was soon called, and it was off to go board the 737-300 Combi. My seat for today was 18F, about halfway down the passenger cabin of today's 737. Settling in here, the legroom was not exactly the best, but outside is kind of the ideal aft wing view on a 737 Classic. We are spoiled to still see a lot of these around Canada, especially when I hear friends in Europe talking about going out of their way to get on one. One thing I will say though is that seat selection was not handled well during the swap from the 400 to the 300. Part of the reason we lined up so early at check-in was to reconfirm our window seats again, especially when one of us got moved from a window to a middle without any notification. For me though, this will do just fine. As usual, I'll talk about the cabin in more detail once we're airborne, so here's the departure from Ottawa using what seemed like every possible inch of runway 07. Today's flight up to Iqaluit would take us mostly north and a bit to the east, crossing into Quebec right away and passing over NUNAVUT, then across the Hudson Strait towards Baffin Island. Looking around the seat here, it is a familiar type in Canadian aviation, with a typical tray table that moves, a seat back pocket that didn't stretch a lot, and a literature pocket up top. There you'd find the safety card for the 737-300 Combi, a couple unbranded air sickness bags, and a copy of Up Here, which always has some interesting articles on the Canadian North. There's also a plastic coat hook on the side of each seat.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome on board Canadian North Flight 103 with service to Iqaluit. Our flying time today will be 2 hours and 50 minutes at a flying cruising altitude of 33,000 feet. In a few moments, we'll be beginning our in-flight service. We're pleased to offer you a choice of hot lunches this afternoon, either meatloaf with potatoes and vegetables or a vegetarian lasagna. This will be served with a complimentary glass of red or white wine, a selection of pop or juices, and after the meal service, when we're done collecting your trays, we'll come through with our hot chocolate chip cookie and another beverage trolley, which will also include coffee and tea.
With that announcement, the in-flight service started, with this meal tray that also came with a choice of beverage. I went for the meatloaf, which came with potatoes, beans, and carrots in a really tasty sauce. Also on the tray was some plastic cutlery, a wipe, butter, some coleslaw, and some bread. The meatloaf was pretty good, and all the vegetables were nice and fresh. It all went very well with the sauce, and I used the bread to mop up the rest of it. The coleslaw was fresh and tasty too. Getting meals like this on domestic flights is exclusively a Northern Airline thing, and it's always a nice treat. The trays were soon cleared in a timely manner, and I turned my attention outside to the endless lakes and rivers of Quebec. The service wasn't done just yet though, and the crew gave out a warm chocolate chip cookie, which smelled and tasted absolutely delicious. Everything finished up with a choice of coffee, tea, or Canadian North special coffee, which is essentially coffee with a vodka liqueur and whipped cream. It was around then that we marked the halfway point of the flight, crossing the 55th parallel north and entering NUNAVUT proper. It was interesting looking down at the similar landscape that I'd flown over a couple years before, but a bit lower in one of Air Inuit's Dash 8s going the opposite direction. The Nunavut landscape was quickly replaced with a solid layer of clouds as we continued further north. In this half-cargo configuration, Canadian North 737-300QCs seat 80 passengers. The very front of the passenger section has a unique arrangement around the overwing exits, with rows 10 and 11 having only the middle and aisle seats before reverting to the usual 3-3 layout for the rest of the cabin. Unlike the 200, the back is a more traditional layout, with the back wall being galley space and lavatories on either side of the aisle. These are decently roomy and lit well enough. Now, in this arrangement with cargo up front, it's a little tricky to get a flight deck visit. However, after the flight, one of our cabin crew very kindly walked us up front to take a quick peek. They couldn't offload the cargo until we were inside though, so we kept it as brief as possible and really appreciated them taking the time. Meanwhile, we had a break in the cloud cover as we left Nunavut and mainland North America behind and headed out over the Hudson Strait. That led to some beautiful views of Baffin Island as we started our descent. Please enjoy the sunset lighting and views of the city as we arrive on Iqaluit's runway 34. So overall, that was a pleasant flight with Canadian North. I always like flying with them, especially when you get a free meal, and of course those delicious chocolate chip cookies. It was also nice to fly on another 737 Classic, even if it was not necessarily the variant I was hoping for. The one major hiccup was our seat selection changing, which I still think could have been handled better, especially since the 400 has almost the exact same layout as the 300 QC. Still, once that got sorted out, it was a very enjoyable flight, and this video will effectively kick off a series that has been on my bucket list for the longest time. Again, it's not going to be too hard to guess where I'm headed next, so I hope you'll stick around for the next couple of very exciting flights. Thanks so much for watching this trip report with Canadian North, and I'll see you in the next one.